before, or the recording's on. The Lake County Master Gardeners, we're affiliated with Purdue. Our whole mission is about education. So when you come to something like our plant sale or our garden walk, you're actually helping fund things like this tonight so we can bring speakers like Amy in. Upcoming, we have later on in the month, we've got Peter Sheardy. His presentation was postponed because we got that one of those huge storms we've had all summer. Then we've got Bob the tomato guy from Chicago. He's going to come and do an in-person heirloom tomato talk and seed, and we're going to taste some tomatoes. And then Becca from Extension in September is going to do a tree walk with us and show us identify the different trees and issues that are affiliated with the trees. And then the ever popular Wayne Gruber will be with us in October, and he'll let us know what he's planning to talk about soon. And then we have Dr. Scott Stewart, who was affiliated with the Laurie Gardens up in Chicago. If you've ever been up to those, he was scheduled for January, but then he got sick, so he will be joining us again. So tonight we have Amy Powers. I'm so excited. I'm a huge fan. I love it because if you follow her on any of the social media channels, she gives advice that's relevant to us. Here in the Midwest, she's from Arlington Heights. She's based out of Arlington Heights. She's got over 700,000 followers on social media. She's got a great look on her site at poweredupplants.com. She's got an interesting way that got her this way. She's not necessarily a horticulturist, by trade. She did something else and then got into gardening, which she gives great advice. And then tonight's presentation is on obviously beneficial insects. And so we welcome Amy, and I'll stop sharing my screen and off we go.
So can everyone see my presentation up with the beautiful butterflies?
Let's see, I can.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so speaking of Lurie Garden, these pictures were taken in the Lurie Garden. Tonight we're talking about beneficial insects. I think they are the unsung heroes of your garden. I am a big fanatic of insects. So a little bit about me. I started making videos. I became a master gardener about 10 years ago. And then during the pandemic, we didn't have a lot of opportunities to do volunteering. And so I just started making videos. My sister back home in Canada was the sibling who didn't pay attention to any of the gardening lessons that my parents taught us all. And she bought her first house during the pandemic. And she didn't know anything about gardening and pruning. And so I started making videos, and I created my own little page for her to watch videos on. And then my son one day said, your limelight hydrangea pruning video has like 65,000 views on it. And I'm like, oh, it does? I don't even know. Is that a lot? I have no idea. So slowly but surely over the last 4 or 5 years, I just started kind of making an effort to post 3 videos a week. And then last year I tried to post 5 videos a week. And now I'm posting every day and I'm having a lot of fun. I've always loved teaching. My parents are teachers. I have a chemistry degree. And then I went into computer programming, and I have a kind of roundabout way of getting here, but I've always been an outdoor kid. I've always been a nature person. And so social media has kind of reconnected me back to the education and the sports coaching. I played a lot of college soccer. So yeah, it's a crazy ride to think that I'm no longer in IT consulting and I'm doing full-time garden coaching and educating, but I'm having a blast at my second career. You can follow me on all of the channels. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. I post the same content across all of the channels every day. So insects, let's get into it. They are the hidden workforce of the garden. Beneficial insects build healthy gardens. 98% of insects are classified as beneficial and only 2% are considered pests. And insects do a lot. They build soil, they pollinate, they take care of pest control and keeping a balance on all the insects in the garden, and they perform some other important ecosystem functions. One thing that when I became a master gardener that I started to learn a lot about was healthy soil. So healthy soil is alive. I never knew that. There are soil organisms that recycle nutrients, that improve your soil structure, that increase water infiltration. They help suppress some plant diseases, and they also build soil organic matter. 1 teaspoon of soil has billions of microbes, which is awesome. And those organisms, part of them are insects. So the other thing I didn't really know much about until probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I've been gardening for more than 20 years, is the plant decomposition process. So it's a natural cycle that feeds the soil, supports plants, and sustains life. So when we think about our organic matter, that's the leaves and stems and flowers and seeds and other organic matter. Once it falls to the ground and it touches the soil, that's when insects and other soil dwellers can get in there and break that organic matter down into smaller pieces. So that's going to increase the surface area for the microbes to come in. So the insects that do a great job in the soil are your beetle larvae and springtails and pillbugs and millipedes. For some of us, earwigs, ants. Ants are beneficial. Snails and slugs, and in some regions, termites. So then the fungi and bacteria take over. They're primary decomposers. They start to break through the tougher plant materials like the lignin, and then the bacteria will start to decompose that even more. So together, the fungi and bacteria, those are the microbes we're talking about. They transform organic matter into simpler compounds. Down here at number 4 at the bottom, nutrients get released through that process. So that's where the nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and calcium, magnesium, all those things get broken down and left in soil solution for the plants to then turn around and absorb again. And so the plant roots have mycorrhizal fungi. They're a special class of fungi where they attach themselves to the roots of plants. And that's how plants get nutrients from the soil, water, all of the NPK we talked about. There's a symbiotic relationship that exists between the plant roots and the fungus. The fungus trades the nutrients and the water, and the plant gives it back some sugars to eat. That's a lot of how the fungi live, is off the food that the plant gives it. And so anything that's perennial, right? Perennial plants like shrubs, trees, and our flowering forbs and grasses, they are all in relationship with the mycorrhizal fungi. So without those fungi, the plants wouldn't be able to get any nutrients out of the ground. So number 6 here on the left, healthy plants then can grow. They produce the leaves, the flowers, the seeds, right? They take the nutrients that the fungi and bacteria cycled into the soil, then they take it back up again and grow more healthy plant tissue. And then number 7, they start to die back. They fall to the ground, and that whole cycle happens all over again. So nutrient recycling, those same nutrients. That's why I don't want us to remove any plant material if we can. The more we leave it, the more we're feeding those insects and fungi and getting that nutrients back in the soil for the plants to use again the next year. So wouldn't it be great if we could take all the leaves and stems and use them as mulch and leave them on the soil and let this whole process happen over and over every year? That would really help our gardens. And then we wouldn't need to be buying fertilizers and organic matter because we'd be using nutrients and organic matter right from our gardens. So let's meet the decomposers. We've got springtails. I didn't even know until a year ago what springtails were. Beetle larvae, ants, and millipedes. They all play different roles. Some of them feed on fungi. Some of them feed on decaying plant material. They support this very complex soil food web. Springtails are among the most abundant soil arthropods on Earth, which I think is crazy. I didn't even know what they were until pretty recently. And if I asked you what was missing, when I was growing up gardening with my parents, what I was always told you wanted to see in your soil when you're digging, it's a good sign you've got soil if you have earthworms. Well, in a lot of the upper Midwest, earthworms aren't native here. Earthworms were imported. So Northern Illinois and in your area of Indiana as well. All of Indiana except the southern region. Glaciers eliminated earthworms from forests in Northern Illinois 10 to 20,000 years ago. There's one native prairie worm that remained after the Ice Age, and they are very rare and hard to find. And a survey that the Illinois Department of Natural Resources did in the 80s, they only found one, literally not only one species, just one worm in all of the 12 sites that were surveyed. So basically, no native worms near us. Worms live where there is organic material to eat. So the imported worms live on the soil surface and they make deep burrows and they pull leaf litter from the surface down deep. Whereas a native prairie worm would live really deep, deep down by the roots. They were decomposing the roots that were dying off every year and recycling those nutrients. And in forests, sadly, introduced worms have shred the leaf litter faster than the normal ecology would. So the leaves that have been imported are shredding through all the leaves that fall so fast that they're removing the habitat for the other insects and wildlife that would normally live there. So earthworms are good, kinda. Next up, so we've got decomposers. Now we're talking about pollinators. So pollinators help plants reproduce. Pollination creates seeds and fruits and nuts. Pollination supports human food, wildlife food, and plant communities. And native pollinators would include bees, flies, beetles, butterflies, moths, and wasps. And so this is a little graphic from a biology book about the basics of pollination and how the insects go from flower to flower looking for food. And then the pollen gets stuck to their body, and the pollen ends up getting deposited on the flowers and pollinating them, which means that the flower now has been fertilized. The pollen goes into the ovary, and now the ovary can start making the seed for reproduction or for birds to eat, or sometimes for us to eat too. This is a little video I think is so cool. The really high resolution showing a butterfly with a proboscis. I think it's interesting. I show this video to a lot of elementary school and middle school kids when I do talks there about pollinator gardens, because a lot of insects they don't care about pollinating plants. That's not why they're there, right? The insects are visiting the flowers because they're looking for food. The pollinating of the plants, that happens as a byproduct, right? That's another symbiotic relationship. I eat the food, and then I happen to help you pollinate the plant. And the pollinator food is nectar. So nectar is a sugar-rich energy for flying, feeding, mating, reproduction. Pollen provides protein, fats, vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients. So as insects move among the flowers, pollen may transfer between compatible flowers. So some insects want pollen. Some insects don't care too much about the pollen. They just want the nectar. So regardless, as the insects are touching the plants, they are transferring pollen around to compatible flowers. So native bees in particular, they were built to move pollen. So up here in Illinois and very similarly in Indiana, 400 to 500 native bee species: bumblebees, mining bees, cellophane bees, mason bees, leafcutter bees, sweat bees, longhorn bees, squash bees. I have been trying to figure out in my own garden what kind of bees I see, and they're so hard. There's so many of them. And it's so hard to get a good picture to do IDs because they're so teeny tiny as well. So bees are especially effective pollinators because their bodies have a lot of many branched little hairs that trap pollen. And so female bees will deliberately collect pollen to feed their developing young. I interviewed a bee researcher from the University of Wisconsin, and she said that when the bees come out in the spring out of the ground or out of the stems where they nest or the leaf litter, that they mate, and then the females want to lay their eggs pretty quickly. Their lifespan is actually very short, and they create a ball of nectar and pollen together, and they lay their egg on top of that ball. And so when the egg hatches, the bee larva lives off of that pollen nectar ball of food. before they emerge as adults. Most native bees are solitary and do not live in hives. Sorry about the dog. Um, Many native bees nest in the ground, as I said. Others nest in hollow stems, dead wood, beetle tunnels, or natural cavities in wood or anywhere they can find a little place to nest. Some native bees are generalists, so others need pollen from very specific plants. And what's really cool is bumblebees and some solitary bees can perform buzz pollination by vibrating flowers to release pollen. So I don't know if you know this, but tomatoes are buzz pollinated. They have female and male plant parts on every flower. So they don't need the pollen to be dropped to different flowers. They have everything they need in one flower. And so when bumblebees, as an example, buzz, that's what they do when the way their body works when they are moving. They shake and buzz up the pollen on the same flower to drop it into the ovary of the tomato plant. So other types of bees, like honeybees that we think of as pollinators, they can't buzz pollinate. So we need our native bees as well to perform a lot of healthy pollinator functions for us. And here's the thing, honeybees are not native. We hear a lot about honeybees. They're a valuable managed agricultural pollinator. They're introduced from Europe. They live in large colonies and can be transported to blooming crops. They've been managed and selectively bred for hundreds of years for traits that are useful to people. Modern honeybee health problems, there's a lot of them. I don't know if you've been reading about it in the news, but we've been losing a lot of honeybees. There's mites and viruses, pathogens, pesticide exposure, poor nutrition and management stress. There's a lot of modern issues that we're having with honeybees. Like I said, honeybees can't perform buzz pollination. And native pollinators can be highly effective crop pollinators too, and can improve fruit set and resilience. So researchers are actively looking into whether or not we can start moving agriculture towards native insects to pollinate instead of being so dependent on one type of honeybee. Now, these are my favorites. I've been trying to learn how to identify these. These are flower flies, which are either hoverflies or syrphid flies. They resemble bees. They have a lot of that black and yellow color, but they're a true fly. They cannot sting or bite. Adults visit flowers for nectar and pollen, and they transfer pollen as they feed. Many have short mouth parts, and what we're going to talk about later is how the anatomy of the insect kind of dictates what type of flowers that insect wants to get their pollen and nectar from. So these hoverflies and syrphid flies need small, open flowers with easy to reach nectar and pollen. Good native plants for these types of insects would be golden alexander, culver's root, rattlesnake master, goldenrods, and asters. And the larva, after those eggs hatch, the larva of many of these species eat aphids and other soft-bodied insects. So they also participate in pest management for us. So that's an example of insects that can do more than one job, right? They're pollinators and they're also helping keep other insects in check in the garden. Beetles, super cool, ancient flower visitors. Beetles have been among the earliest insect pollinators long before bees even evolved. They often visit large, open, bowl-shaped flowers where the pollen is accessible. They don't flit and fly around the flower, they crawl across the flower. So some of them feed on pollen and nectar, some of them actually eat flower tissue, and all the while they're moving pollen on their bodies across flowers. Beetle pollinated flowers are often really large and sturdy enough because they are a larger insect. And so they need to be the type of flower that can tolerate that kind of crawling or feeding from a beetle. Native plants visited by beetles would be native magnolia, pawpaw, native roses, wild geranium, prickly pear, goldenrods, native sunflowers. Some beetles pollinate, others are decomposers, others are predators, herbivores. There's a whole bunch of roles that beetles can play in our ecosystems and in our garden. Butterflies, we want to think about nectar and host plants when we think about plants. So adults visit flowers for nectar. And many butterflies have that long proboscis, like a straw they use to drink the nectar. Butterflies are less efficient at pollinating than bees. They do contribute to pollination, but they're nowhere near as effective at it. But butterflies are really, really, really important, same as moths. They are considered champion energy converters. So when we think about sunlight being the big source of energy on the earth, the plants have learned to convert that sunlight into green leafy tissue, right? The caterpillars then eat the leaves and they grow incredibly fast. And their bodies are loaded with protein and nutrients for wildlife, especially birds. So the energy from the sun goes to the plant, and then the leaves get eaten by, there are other insects, not just caterpillars, but caterpillars are the predominant ones that do it. And their bodies become, they take up all that green tissue and convert it into their body tissue. And that becomes a really healthy food source for other wildlife, like I said, especially birds. And butterflies are specialists. Okay, so this, you probably all recognize this picture as a monarch butterfly, and it is on butterfly weed, which is a milkweed. So in order for monarch caterpillars to reproduce, they need a specialist type of plant. They can only lay their eggs on milkweeds. So when their eggs hatch, those little larvae, they don't have wings. They can't fly around and visit flowers for food. They have to eat whatever they're touching. And so monarch caterpillars have co-evolved with milkweed so that their babies and larvae can only live off of that specific plant. Black swallowtails like carrot family plants. The great spangled fritillaries use native violets. Eastern tiger swallowtails use native cherries and tulip trees. So each type of butterfly, and this goes for moths too, they need specific host plants in order to reproduce. So we don't want to be thinking about just the flowers for nectar and pollen. We also want to be thinking about host plants. And then moths are on the night shift. Now, this is a picture of a daytime moth, the snowberry clearwing. It's hard to get a good picture of a nighttime moth because it's usually dark out. But many moths are active at dusk, overnight, or in the early morning, some during the day, like this snowberry clearwing moth. So moth pollinated flowers, because they're predominantly pollinated at night, they're often pale in color, which makes them easier to see at night. They're usually very fragrant, so that some moths use the smell to determine where their food source is. They're generally tubular shaped. They open at night and they're rich in nectar. I think a really cool thing about some adult moths, they don't actually feed on flowers. Once they go through the pupating process and turn into an adult, some species just live off of all the food they ate when they were a teenager, and they don't actually need any more food as an adult. Moth caterpillars are extremely important food for birds and other wildlife as well. And moths, like butterflies, are specialists and require specific families of plants to lay their eggs on. Native wasps. This is kind of a ugly picture, but it's kind of cool at the same time. Native wasps, they're pollinators and pest managers. So adult native wasps will visit flowers for nectar, and they may also transfer pollen while feeding. Many native wasps have short mouth parts, and they also need the small, shallow flowers. Many native wasps are solitary, and they do not defend large colonies, so they're not aggressive. The native wasps are not. Some native wasps hunt caterpillars, crickets, katydids, spiders, beetles, cicadas, and other insects to feed their young. And parasitoid wasps lay their eggs inside a soft-bodied insect. So that's what this is a picture of. This is a tomato hornworm, and the braconid wasp lays its eggs inside the body, and when the eggs hatch, they eat the hornworm or whatever the host insect is. And what's even more fascinating is they leave the organs until the end so that they know that that's going to keep their host plant alive long enough for them to get into what you see in this picture, which is the cocoon stage, so that they can live as long as possible, which is pretty amazing. So this is what I've been into a lot this year. This is a picture that I took of what I think is a carpenter bee. Again, I'm learning how to identify them all. This is a native lance leaf coreopsis. I started doing a lot of research on this. It's very cool. When it comes to biodiversity, we really need different types of flowers. So over many generations, plants with traits that attracted effective pollinators were the ones that were most likely to reproduce and pass those traits on. So they were naturally selected. And at the same time, insects that had traits that helped them find particular floral resources, like places for nectar and pollen, they were most likely to survive and reproduce. So that's why we have this very close relationship between the anatomy of the flower and the anatomy and behavior of that pollinator. So in this example, um, what I've been learning is that lance leaf coreopsis has these diskettes on the top of a little flower. You can kind of see them sticking out with this little yellow here, and that's the pollen. And so these little small insects, while they're in at the base here looking for the nectar, they're also getting the pollen off the end. It falls all over their bodies. And so it's a really great example of how these teeny tiny insects, you'll find them on specific types of flowers because the flower anatomy is perfectly shaped for their little body, and that has been evolving for tens of thousands of years and for some of the millions of years, which I think is pretty awesome. So some examples, those long floral tubes. So I think of penstemon or beard tongue or monarda, the bee balms, right? Those long floral tubes, they favor insects with long tongues, like long tongue bees, or a proboscis, like those butterflies, or even a hummingbird or a hummingbird moth. The tiny shallow flowers will allow the short-mouthed insects like those little bees and flower flies and tiny native wasps to get to their nectar. Some flowers release pollen only when vibrated by a bee capable of buzz pollination, like the tomatoes. And pale, fragrant flowers that open at night will attract nocturnal moths. Broad flower clusters. They are going to provide a landing platform for butterflies. Butterflies need to stick their legs out and land, and then they put their proboscis out. Large, sturdy, open flowers can accommodate beetles crawling through them. So I think this is really cool. So what we want to do in our gardens is support all stages of the insect life cycle. We want to provide native flowers from early spring all the way through late fall. We want to find flowers with different shapes and sizes and heights and colors and fragrances and bloom times. We want to plant flowers together. So we want to mass a couple of bee balm together so that the insects can find them and use them efficiently. We also want to make sure we're including caterpillar host plants for butterflies and moths. I have a slide in the index that specifically has a whole list of the Department of Natural Resources here in Illinois, a bunch of host plants and specifically what insects live off of them. And some specialist bee pollen plants as well. I have a list of that in the appendix. And we want to leave some exposed, undisturbed soil for ground nesting bees. We want to leave our hollow stems up. So in the spring when we're cutting back, we don't want to cut everything to the ground. We want to leave anything that's hollow, like our cone flowers or our swamp milkweed. We want to leave those anywhere from 12 to 24 inches high because the stem nesting bees are going to come in and take those little pollen balls that they make and line them up the length of the stem and lay their eggs in there. We also want to reduce nighttime lighting because we want to support moths and other nocturnal insects. And a true pollinator garden should support food for the adults, host plants for the babies, nesting and winter habitat, and protection through every stage of life. Next up, we have insects that are predators and parasitoids. So predators and parasitoids help keep insect populations in balance. They help control aphids, mites, thrips, which everybody complains to me about thrips. Thrips are really hard to manage. So we really want to have other insects around that can help control them for us. They control caterpillars, insect eggs, and other plant-eating insects. Now, predators need prey. Okay, in this picture here, this is a ladybug larva that's eating aphids. Okay, so we need to have some aphids around in order to feed the other insects. So seeing a few pests does not always mean we need to intervene. We need to give the beneficial insects time to respond before we just jump in and start spraying for aphids, as an example, right? So I'd love you to, when you start to notice some pests, like, is this necessarily bad? Is it killing the plant? What role are these insects playing? Could I wait another 10 days and see if some other insects come in to help me out? Usually in my garden now they do. Here's a cool video of that lady beetle. So this is a lady beetle larva. There are 80 native species of lady beetles here in Illinois and northern Indiana. Lady beetles are predators as both larvae and adults. They may eat aphids, scale. I have had scale now this year on my lilacs and on my magnolia, so I'm leaving them for a little while to see if we can get some other predators to come eat them. Mealybugs and other insect eggs. The larvae look like tiny black and orange alligators, and some gardeners mistaken them for pests. These are not bad. They're great to have in your garden. They overwinter in decaying wood, like stumps and leaf litter and loose tree bark and dense vegetation. So in the fall, we want to leave as much of our stems and throw a couple of those broken limbs off to the back of the property, and let's give them some space so that that can provide habitat in the winter for some of these beneficial insects. Another one of my faves, green lacewings. These are the really cool white eggs on the end of these little hair-like strings. I see a lot of green lacewings in my garden. Their larvae are active predators. They eat aphids, mites, thrips, whiteflies, small caterpillars, and insect eggs. They capture prey with their large curved jaws. And some lacewing larvae, the top right picture here, super cool that somebody caught this on a high resolution photo. Um, they camouflage themselves by carrying plant material or lichen or empty aphid skins and other debris, and they stick them to their own back. And that is because aphids, as an example, I had an entomologist tell me one time they call them fat sacks of sugar. Aphids secrete honeydew. And that sappy honeydew is what ants love to eat. So when you see ants around, you probably need to find the sap that they're eating. That's why they're there. A lot of people tell me, oh no, there's ants all over my tree. Well, the ants aren't there to eat your tree. Ants generally don't eat leaves and stems. The ants are there for sap. So you probably have an insect like an aphid that's producing sap, or scale. Scale produces sap as well. And then what happens is, in the case of aphids, the ants farm them. So the ants protect them. The ants will try to keep the green lacewing larva and the ladybug larva from eating them because they want to keep the aphids around as long as possible for their sugar. And so this top right photo here is where the green lacewing has figured out that if they can hide themselves in whatever debris they can find, that's how they get around the ants, which I think is pretty ingenious. Um, I also love this. I see this on my landsleaf coreopsis this year. This is a minute pirate bug. They feed on thrips, aphids, spider mites, white flies, insect eggs, small caterpillars, and other soft-bodied insects. And I think it's important to note, I get a lot of people talking about spider mites and thrips. You know, those teeny tiny insects that hide inside the petals of flowers, they're really hard to treat for. So let's not treat, and let's go get some insects in our garden that can get in there and find them. These minute pirate bugs are so small that they will hunt on flowers. So they are in there looking for those thrips and those other teeny tiny flies and things that we don't want to have too much of, and they're helping keep that in check for us. So if they can't find insects, they will feed on pollen and other plant juices. They'll suck some juice out of the plant. They are attracted to flowers with high pollen because that's where they know those little insects are going to be. So you'll often find them on goldenrod, asters, and coneflowers. And like I said, I've seen them on the coreopsis. These ones do bite people. They will make a little bite. Some people it bothers, some people it doesn't. But I've had them in my garden. I haven't been bit yet, so I'm not too worried about it myself. Um, Native paper wasps, a lot of people freak out when they see wasps. Native paper wasps, I find an easy way to kind of tell which ones are native or not is when they fly, do they hang their legs underneath while they're flying through the air? Native paper wasps are important. They are predators of caterpillars and other soft-bodied insects, and this is where I'm going to make my plea to everybody. I know we are out here trying to bring back the monarch butterflies, and we all love the butterflies because they're the most beautiful. We should not be protecting the caterpillars of butterflies by caging them off or hand raising them. People get very upset because they see the wasps ate their monarch butterfly caterpillar. Well, only 5%, they say 5 to 10% of eggs that get laid by butterflies in the wild ever make it to adulthood. They are huge food sources for other wildlife and other insects. They are supposed to be eaten by other insects and wildlife. Now, of course, we'd love them eaten by native wasps and not the imported wasps. But we really should not be intervening in this ecosystem. We want to just bring back the plant diversity and all the diversity of insects and just let Mother Nature run its course. They're not all supposed to make it. When we hand raise those butterflies as well, we are not weeding out the strongest genes, right? In nature, the strongest genes would make it, only that 5 to 10%. We don't want weaker genes being bred into the wild populations. Researchers are saying that's actually hurting the genetic diversity, and we really don't want to hand raise any kind of insects like that. So adult wasps will capture their prey and chew it into soft, protein-rich food for their developing larvae. I just did a video this week about how on all of my collard greens and my kale every year, I normally grow them under a net to keep the cabbage loopers and everything away from skeletonizing the leaves. And then this year I forgot to put the nets on. And what I noticed is these native wasps zipping in there and just chewing up the worms and the caterpillars that were on. I can see the hole damage, and every time I'd flip the leaves over on the collard greens, I couldn't find any of those caterpillars, which I thought was weird because I see the little droppings and I see the holes, but I can't find any caterpillars. And one day I went down, and sure enough, there was a native wasp in there chewing one up and getting it ready to feed its larva. So this really has helped me in my garden. The more biodiversity I've had in the last couple years, the more I'm seeing these types of interactions actually help me in real time. Adult paper wasps will feed primarily on nectar and other sugary foods. So they'll go in for the flowers, they'll patrol for some soft-bodied insects, and then feed them to their young. So as adults, since they do visit flowers, they also probably contribute to pollination. They're social wasps, and they may defend their area around their nest, but away from the nest, they're generally focused on feeding and hunting rather than people. Pretty cool. There's some other predators around too. Those syrphid flies, the hover flies, the ground beetles, assassin bugs and wheel bugs, predatory stink bugs, solitary hunting wasps. There's all kinds, and they're all have been working for tens of thousands of years or more, I think, in keeping each other in check. It's been working this way for a long time. Now, this I think is really cool. These are parasitoids. So a lot of wasps, including the braconid wasp that we saw with this tomato hornworm and these little white cocoons here, they will parasitize other soft-bodied insects. So they lay an egg, or many of them, in a host insect. The larva will develop inside the host's body and then eat the body from the inside out. The host is eventually killed. Common hosts are caterpillars, aphids. So in the top picture here, that is a papery body of an aphid with a hole in it where you can see an insect was inside of it, killed it, and then emerged. I flip over my rose leaves and I'll see quite a few of these papery white aphids just sitting there that you can just flick right off. So that's the kind of thing you want to look for to see if you have some balanced ecosystem happening right inside of your garden. And then meet the wildlife food. So the caterpillars, this is a monarch in my own little patch of rose milkweed last year. Insects are the foundation of the food web. We've lost 40 to 50% of the world's insect population, and we need to do as much as we can to try to help bring them back. Insects are food for lots of other wildlife, birds, bats, frogs and toads, salamander, fish, turtles, small mammals, and other insects. Plant damage is evidence that the energy is moving through the ecosystem. So on this stem of milkweed, I mean, this little guy has just shredded the leaves right down to the stem. And I couldn't be happier about it because in about a week or two, you're going to see this plant just send out new leaves, which is great. The plants have lived with this kind of defoliation for tens of thousands of years. So again, we don't need to be upset about it. It's awesome. It's a natural part of the garden, and it is evidence that energy is going from the sun into the plant, into the leaves, into the body of the caterpillar, and into another insect or wildlife. It's a pretty awesome process actually to watch. So caterpillars in particular are one of the most important foods for many birds. This here is a picture on my dill plant of a swallowtail butterfly caterpillar. Caterpillars, soft-bodied, protein-rich, high in fat. They are moist and easy for nestlings to follow. One nest of chickadees, University of Delaware did some research, 5,000 to 6,000 caterpillars to feed one nest of chickadees. That's insane. Native plants support the native caterpillars, right? Remember, those native caterpillars are specialists, right? They need specific types of plants to raise their young on. So that's why we need to bring those native plants. Native trees and shrubs can support the largest number of caterpillars just because they're so large, right? You think of an oak tree. Native oaks can support hundreds of species of moth and butterfly caterpillars. Bur oak, as an example, can support up to 1,500 unique species of caterpillars. That's crazy. Native cherries can also support many caterpillar species, willows as well. Birches, maples, serviceberry, dogwoods, and native shrubs are contributing food to the bird food web. So it's important for us to really pay a little extra attention to caterpillars since they are the primary energy consumers that support such a complexity on the food web. So what can we do in our gardens? We can prioritize native plants. We can include lots of layering. So trees, shrubs, perennials, and grasses. We want to provide flowers from early spring through late fall. We want to include different flower shapes for different pollinators. Plant in groups so insects can find and use the flowers efficiently, and include host plants for butterflies, moths, and specialist insects. So this is a little picture I took yesterday in my garden. I've got switchgrass there in the back. I've got rattlesnake master, which is a really cool, interesting, tiny little flower, this little sphere for all kinds of different small insects. It's also a host plant for swallowtails. I have some liatris about to bloom. I have anise hyssop in the back. I've got the little burgundy penstemon seeds. That was one of my spring bloomers. I've got a little blue stem grass, scarlet bee balm, some purple cone flowers, and that's just what's in bloom now. This was loaded with blooms even early in April, and it will be blooming all the way until I have a little peek of the stems coming out here in the back right by the anise hyssop of my smooth blue aster, and I've got goldenrod in here too. Leaving the leaves, this is just a sampling of native insects that live in the leaves. So in the fall, let's prioritize not cleaning up. Let's leave everything as it is. Now, we don't want to smother the lawn, and there's a lot of nuance to it for sure, but leave as much as you can. There are insects living in there, and try not to shred the leaves. I know a lot of people drive the mower over it. I get it. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do, but try to leave as many fully intact leaves as you can. The other benefits of leaving the leaves, it's food for those decomposers, right? So we want to leave that organic matter so that the insects and decomposers have something to eat. That decomposition is feeding our soil microbiome, makes our soil healthier for plants. It acts as a mulch, moderating your soil temperature and retaining soil moisture. It makes fall gardening easier. I try not to do hardly anything in the fall. Um, so that's going to give us the seasonal habitat with the leaves. We want to leave healthy stems standing through the winter. We want to retain dead wood and logs where it's practical, provide some accessible undisturbed soil for ground nesting bees, use living plants instead of covering every space with a thick mulch if you can. So as much of that bare soil, actually the majority of native bees here in the Midwest are ground nesting bees. They're not aggressive. They're not colonizing like in a hive. We want to avoid landscape fabric. That is creating a barrier between the organic matter and the soil. We don't want any landscape fabric. We want the soil touching the organic matter, and reduce unnecessary outdoor lighting at night. And please rethink pest management. You need to know what the insect is before you treat. Try to learn and recognize what the beneficial insects look like that could help you with the particular pest. Accept some leaf damage. Allow some of those insects to sit around before you go in and try to get rid of them. That's going to attract the other beneficial insects. Give your predators and your parasitoids time to respond. Look for signs that natural pest control is already working. And if you must, use low toxic pesticides and only as a last resort. And as a note, if you have a really serious pest infestation attacking a plant, it's usually because your plant is already under stress. I want you to avoid those broad spectrum insecticides, the neonicotinoids. Never spray your flowers while the pollinators are active. And remember, a healthy garden is not insect free. So we want to feed our insects. We want to house our insects. We want to protect our insects. All right. So in the appendix here, this is from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. This is the common butterfly name and the common host plant. I think this is kind of useful to think of when we're out there selecting flowers, to make sure we have some plants off this list so that we are hosting some caterpillars. Here is also some more examples of different flowers and how that flower's anatomy matches up with specific native insects if you're interested in that. And then here are some specialist bees and the types of plants that they specifically need in order to get the pollen that they have co-evolved with for a long time. And so I am happy to take some questions. Yeah, why couldn't God have disinvented the Japanese beetles? No kidding. Oh, bumblebees on the tall geraniums, which is great. So hollow stems in the springtime. So what I learned from Valerie up at the University of Wisconsin, the bee researcher I talked to, we want to leave our stems, and it's not just hollow. Hollow is the easiest one. It's also anything pithy, like squishy. If you squish the stem, it's got a little give to it because they can burrow down in there too after that stem has kind of died off for about a year. And we want to cut our stems at various heights because different bees prefer stems at different heights, anywhere from 12 to 24 inches tall. I find that by the time the perennial starts to turn green again in the spring, I don't even notice that I left the stems there. And so definitely try to leave as many stems at differing heights as possible. And then the following year, when you come back and you see the stems you cut the year before, just leave them alone. There might still be insects. There are insects emerging out of stems until June. So just leave the stems. The ones that are up, once the bees are done with them, they'll just fall over on the ground anyway. If you must cut some back, at least leave the stems on the ground. There are many insects that will still find hollow stems to nest in, even if they're on the ground. They prefer to have them standing. But if all you can stand, or you got a spouse that can't stand it, at least try to keep as much stems around the garden as you can. Excellent point here about the sycamore with anthracnose. So any diseased leaves, you don't want to leave over winter because we don't want that disease pathogen lingering around and overwintering in the soil. If you also have a pest infestation, like slugs all over your hostas, I wouldn't leave those either. we don't want to leave the overwintering habitat for insects that we don't want. Uh, Insects like hydrangeas. Actually, so it kind of depends on the hydrangea. So the only native hydrangea up here in the uh, north part of the Midwest is hydrangea arborescens. So Annabelle, which is the most common hydrangea that has been bred, it is actually a clone. Okay, it's important to know this. So Annabelle, when it comes to trees and shrubs that are cloned, that have a named cultivar at the end, like Annabelle in quotes, so somebody was walking around in Anna, Illinois many years ago, and as she saw this native hydrangea in the wild, she took a shovel and dug off a part that had these big, huge, floppy, beautiful flowers. And so she put that in her garden. It kept growing. She kept sharing it. Eventually, someone at University of Illinois got it and made it a named cultivar. But it's a sterile plant for insects. So you won't see very many insects pollinating on an Annabelle hydrangea, even though it's technically a clone of a native. I have been growing the cultivar of that arborescens called Haas Halo, Haas Halo. That's got a big, I mean, it must be 10 inches across of a big lace cap hydrangea. And I got rid of my Annabelles and replaced them this year with this variety because there's little tiny florets in there that have pollen in the middle. Those lace cap flowers have little tiny florets that have pollen. And so I now see little tiny syrphid flies and bees on my hydrangeas, which I never had before. Um, in terms of the other ones that are native, oak leaf hydrangeas are native to the southeast quadrant of the United States. They're not native all the way up here in Indiana and Illinois. So you may get some pollination, but the native insects here just don't know that plant. They don't know limelight. They don't know endless summer. They're not from here. So that's why you don't get a lot of pollinator activity from hydrangeas. Personally, I have several types of hydrangeas. I don't have too many of them. They're a medium moisture plant, and with the amount of heat and drought we get now, hydrangeas need a lot of extra water. And I am not trying to plan my garden anymore for plants that require a lot of extra water maintenance. So I got rid of two hydrangeas actually this year. They were in a dry location. They just never looked great because they always wanted water. So that's just my personal opinion. So how do you feel about purchasing ladybugs or lacewings? I don't have to. You shouldn't have to, really, right? Like if you just bring a whole bunch of diversity of plants, you're going to see an incredible, and stop spraying pesticides. You're going to see an incredible amount of insects immediately in your garden. So the green lacewings come for free if you provide some aphids for them to eat. Um, Ladybugs particular, I would not buy because when they get released, the first thing they want to do is fly several miles and make a nest. So ladybugs should not be bought because they will not stay where you release them. So maybe in a greenhouse, that would work if you were a commercial operation. Lacewing larvae you can buy, or you can buy the eggs. That would be a better choice. But again, you don't need to. They're already here and they'll come when you plant the plants and leave the insects. Do you advise leaving peony foliage? I don't because so many of them have powdery mildew on them. So again, anything diseased, we don't want to leave over the winter. Okay, so I have a lot of host plants for butterflies that lay eggs on. I have never seen any caterpillars. I get this question a lot. So again, the host plants are one thing, but you need to attract the adults there first. So what you need is April to October flowers that butterflies are attracted to. Once you get the adults there, then they will find the milkweeds or the swallowtails and the carrot family plants. But I've had, I mean, when did I first put my rose milkweed? I grow rose, which is swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. That is grown in a raised bed for me. I didn't want to put it in the ground because the rabbits eat it. So I grow it in a container and it comes back every year. You can leave it out in the winter. And I had one caterpillar the first year, then I had two. Then I let it self seed in the entire 8 foot long planting bed. And now that I have all these baby seedlings, I find that the monarchs in particular, the females prefer the younger plants to lay their eggs on. So letting your plant self seed in that area and creating that grouping by letting the seeds, or you can drop them yourself in the fall and let the seeds fill in with younger plants, and having all of those blooms throughout the seasons, what's going to bring the adults. The other thing is if your neighbors are spraying a lot of pesticides, and the other thing that pollinators need is a continuous corridor, right? It's like my block is tough because no one else on my whole block has any pollinator gardens or native plants. But I am lucky that a few doors down, we have a wet bottom retention pond that's all native plants. So I think that helps because there's so many blooming plants all the time between my garden and two doors down. So the other thing you could do is really encourage your neighbors, even just to plant a small little, 3 foot by 3 foot pollinator garden. That would certainly help. But the more food around you have, the better chances you have of getting the butterflies. Yes, so HOA, that's the other thing. I would try to grow some of these native plants in a container. I've had so much success, even with some clients that I have that don't have a garden, that have a small city space and not a lot of room to plant. As long as your perennials are hardy 2 zones colder than where you live, right? So, like I'm in zone 6. I'm not sure whether you guys are 7 or not, but 2 zones colder would be 2 zones smaller, right? So I'm in zone 6, subtract 2. So any of those native plants, most of the native plants around here are native all the way to zone 3. So I grow the liatris, that big purple blazing star. I grow purple prairie clover, the milkweeds. I've got some coral bells, all of the swamp milkweed. You can grow that in a container all winter and it keeps coming back. I've got eastern red columbine in there for the spring. So maybe that's a way to get around the HOA, is to kind of do it as a container garden, and maybe they wouldn't even know that it was a perennial versus an annual in there. Let's see, more questions. Control head clipping weevil causing flower heads to dangle on your cone flowers. Again, like you have to have the diversity. So like when I look out my window here to that bed that I showed in the picture, it's 400 square feet. And I think I counted 35 different varieties of native plants in there. Once you have all the plants with all the different size flowers, you'd be amazed. Like I see holes in the leaves all over my Joe Pye weed when it first started to come out, and I was concerned and I couldn't flip the leaves over and see what it was, so I couldn't identify it. Whatever it was is gone now because after it got about 2 feet tall, there's no more holes in the leaves happening. So, specifically head clipping weevil, I don't know, but if it's a native insect, there's definitely another insect that could eat it. Yeah, Japanese beetles. Yep. So first of all, with Japanese beetles, do not use the traps. They're not traps. They get marketed to you as a trap. They were invented at the University of Kentucky as a lure. Researchers invented those to put out all the pheromones to attract as many as possible to the research field. So they are attracting more to the entire region than they are trapping. And I know you see a bag full of dead beetles and you think you've done a good job. That is not helping the whole community around you or your neighbors. So please don't do that. The best thing to do is to get everybody around you treating for the grubs. There's organic controls you can do that with. I used milky spore granules. It takes about 2 years. I had skunks digging up the lawn when I first moved in, and now I don't have them anymore. So it's possible. I've seen a huge decrease because all my neighbors now are also doing that. The other thing is, sadly, because that is not part of the food web here, right? They did not evolve here. The Japanese beetles, and also because of that hard shell coating they have, birds don't really eat them. So there is not much you can do. Please don't use a systemic insecticide because they get taken up by the roots and then all the leaves get the chemical in them, which the beetles don't want to eat. However, every single insect that comes to pollinate or get nectar has the chemical in it as well, and it has been shown to do a lot of destruction to the beneficial insects. So please don't rake in any of that 3-in-1 Bayer Advanced fungicide, insecticide all in one. That is a neonicotinoid called imidacloprid. Please don't ever use that. What I do for Japanese beetles is middle of June, I go out every morning and walk around the garden. I just keep an eye out on the plants I know that they like to eat, and I just knock them off into soapy water. The trick is you need to get them when they start. When they chew on the tissue, they emit a pheromone out to attract the rest of the beetles, like those lures. The lures were designed around that mechanism. So when you see them chewing in the beginning, in like mid-June around here, then you got to pull that leaf off that it was chewing and dispose of it. If you leave it on there, it's bringing all the other beetles to that plant. So if you can get on top of it early, then that's what you need to do. The other thing is they are very rarely do they do anything more than cosmetic damage. I know they look bad. There has been a fly that was brought in by the government from Japan, which is a parasitoid. So if you ever see a Japanese beetle with little white markings, little dots all around the outside of their body, that is a beetle that has been parasitized, and it will die. And the larva will live and fly off, and there'll be more of the beneficial fly. So if you ever see one of the Japanese beetles and it has little white dots around the edge of its body, don't drown that one. Let it live and let those eggs hatch inside of it. Yeah, the black spotted maple leaves, that's a lot of weather-driven disease there. So it doesn't always come back, but yes, you are supposed to try to get rid of that. It's not harmful for the soil, but it will come back next year on your maple leaves because the spores will overwinter and then readily attach themselves to the new leaves in the spring. So it's not bad for the soil to leave the black spot. It's just going to be black spot again next year. Nematodes on the milkweed weevils. I haven't tried that, but sure. Yes, I can share the appendix and you can get the video. Yeah, if you get out, when you're watching the video on YouTube, you can also just pause it and just take a screenshot. Yes, drown your Japanese beetles. Okay, so with my native garden, geez, I saw insects I'd never seen before, like the first year that you get flowers. So depending on what you plant, as soon as you're getting flowers, you'll start seeing insects. It probably took me like 3 years because over the course of 3 years, I started trying new plants and I'm going to get rid of this non-native plant. I don't need the hellebores anymore. I want to try this plant. So I just kind of started having a lot of fun diversifying just because there's thousands of native plants out there that like none of us have ever really seen before. So once I really started playing around and adding different plants, that's when everything really blew up. And like even my daughter this year, who is my not nature loving kid, she doesn't really care. But even she said like, man, we have so many birds out here this year. And I'm like, yeah, see it. The birds come when the insects come. That comes from the host plants. In your new subdivision, it would be great to have some native trees, right? A common hackberry tree is what I have out in front of my house. That is loaded with insects all the time. I see all kinds of caterpillars out there. So try to get native trees as much as possible. That's going to be your biggest. And then also, I think it's important when choosing a tree to go off of, like here in Chicago, we have the Chicago Tree Initiative. If you go to powersplants.com under blogs, there's a blog post I did last year about trees that are adaptable to climate change. So I'd love for you to pick trees that have green going across all the columns of adaptability. Those are trees that what they think are going to be more adaptable to heat and drought and also flooding and all of the things that are here in our weather now. So if you could pick a native tree off that list, I think that would be your best bet, because then you're going to get a tree that's adaptable and get a tree that's going to support insects. And an oak would be fantastic. So are there any other questions? I think I got to all of them.
I think you did too.
I can tell you just from experience, I know this Sunday too, like I get up and walk around. Like all I do now is take pictures of like, man, look at the Culver's root and look at, oh man, there's like 5 different bees on here. Or is that a fly? Like it's pretty meditative when you're up early in the morning and the neighborhood's quiet. You just hear the birds and you're like, man, look at like it's very cool. And I think being human, we are also part of this complex ecosystem. And it's really awesome when you bring habitat back to just get to see it all happening. And then I get to see, I had 50 or 60 monarch caterpillars last year. I had swallowtail caterpillars. Like it's really, really, really fun. And I haven't sprayed for anything. The sawfly larva on my roses now, like I walked at my second flush of growth. The first spring growth had some holes. And now this second round of growth, I've hardly any. And I see those little paper wasps out there patrolling the leaves, which is really great to see. So it's not just an academic in a book. It is real, and I've seen it in my own garden. So thank you to everybody for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. This was wonderful. Again, everybody will put this on our website, Lake County mastergardeners.org, and then our YouTube channel. And thank you so much again, Amy. This was wonderful.
Great. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You all have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.